Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. The desert wind howled through the Syrian night as Dwayne Duffy crouched behind a crumbling concrete barrier, his assault rifle trained on the compound ahead. At 34, he was the youngest tactical leader in Navy SEAL Team 4's history, a reputation built on 15 years of flawless operations and an almost supernatural ability to read his enemies' minds. His weathered face bore the scars of countless missions, but his steel-gray eyes remained sharp as a blade. The mission had been routine: extract a high-value target from a terrorist cell operating near Aleppo. What wasn't routine was the satellite phone buzzing in his tactical vest at 0200 hours. Standard protocol demanded radio silence during operations, but the caller ID made his blood run cold. Home. Something was wrong. Carolyn never called during missions unless it was an emergency involving their 8-year-old son, Tommy. His mind raced through possibilities: accident, illness, family death, as he signaled his team to hold position and answered the call. "Baby, thank God you picked up," came a voice that wasn't his wife's. Male, smug, unfamiliar. "This is Vincent Swartz, your wife's boss. We need to talk, soldier boy." Dwayne's finger tightened on his weapon's grip. Vincent Swartz, he knew that name. Carolyn worked as a secretary at Swartz Construction, had been there for 2 years since they'd moved to Virginia Beach. She'd mentioned her boss occasionally, always complaints about his wandering eyes and inappropriate comments. "Where's my wife?" Dwayne's voice was deadly calm, the same tone that had made terrorist leaders wet themselves before he put bullets in their heads. A laugh echoed through the phone, followed by muffled sounds in the background. Then Vincent's voice again, dripping with malicious pleasure. "She's right here, actually. Been keeping her real busy while you've been playing war. Want to know something interesting, Duffy? She's pregnant. With my baby." The world seemed to tilt. Dwayne had been deployed for 3 months, but he and Carolyn had been trying for a second child before he left. The timing was possible, but something in Vincent's tone suggested otherwise. "You're lying," Dwayne whispered, though ice was already forming in his veins. "Am I?" "Carolyn, honey, tell your husband what you told me about his performance in bed." Then came the voice that shattered 15 years of marriage in a single sentence. "He's just a weak mechanic anyway, Vincent. You were right about him." Carolyn's voice. No question, but the words hit him like shrapnel. She'd called him a mechanic, his cover story for his real profession. She knew exactly what he was, had lived with the nightmares, the training, the deployments. She'd also seen him disassemble and reassemble weapons blindfolded, watched him run 7-minute miles at 40 below zero, knew he could kill a man with his bare hands in 14 different ways. But to her, to them, he was just a weak mechanic. In the background, he heard another voice, small, scared, familiar. "Mom, where's Daddy? When is Daddy coming home?" Tommy, his son, the boy who worshipped the ground Dwayne walked on, who believed his father was the strongest man in the world. Vincent's laughter returned, more vicious now. "Here's the thing, soldier boy. Your son thinks you're some kind of hero, but we've been working on correcting that impression. Soon he'll forget all about his loser daddy and start calling me Dad. As for you coming back, well, that's not going to be a problem much longer." "What do you mean?" Dwayne's voice was barely audible, but his team knew that tone. They'd moved into defensive positions without being ordered. "I mean, I've got friends, Duffy. Friends who know exactly where you are right now. Friends who deal in permanent solutions to inconvenient husband problems. They should be reaching your position any minute." The line went dead. Dwayne stared at the phone for 3 seconds, his mind processing the implications. Someone had sold out their position. Someone with access to classified mission parameters had given coordinates to hostiles. Vincent Swartz wasn't just screwing his wife. He was connected to people who wanted American soldiers dead. "Contact front." The shout came from Petty Officer Rex Dodd, their explosives expert. Multiple vehicles, armed hostiles inbound from the northwest. Dwayne pocketed the phone and shouldered his rifle. Whatever Vincent Swartz was, whoever he was connected to, the man had just made the mistake of his life. But first, Dwayne had to survive the night. The firefight lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 17 enemy combatants lay dead, and Dwayne's team had suffered only minor injuries. But as they extracted to their forward operating base, Dwayne's mind wasn't on the mission anymore. It was on the fact that Vincent Swartz had somehow arranged an ambush on a classified military operation. The man wasn't just a construction boss fooling around with a lonely military wife. He was connected to something much darker, much more dangerous. And he'd made the fatal error of believing Dwayne Duffy was just a weak mechanic. 3 days later, Dwayne sat in the debriefing room at the base, staring at a dossier that made his blood turn to ice water. Vincent Swartz, 42, owner of Swartz Construction. No criminal record, no obvious connections to terrorist organizations. But the file included financial records that told a different story: payments from shell companies, unexplained trips to Eastern Europe, connections to private military contractors who didn't ask questions about their clients' politics. The man was a facilitator, someone who helped bad people move money, weapons, and information. And somehow, he'd gained access to classified mission data through his relationship with Carolyn. Had she known? Had his wife of 15 years actively participated in betraying him to enemy forces? The thought burned in his chest like acid. But as he studied the file, a different emotion began to take hold. Not grief, not betrayal, something colder. Something that had kept him alive through 15 years of the world's most dangerous missions. Calculation. Vincent Swartz thought he was playing games with a mechanic. Carolyn thought she'd found a better man, a stronger provider. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who'd spent his entire adult life learning how to destroy his enemies completely and without mercy. Dwayne closed the file and pulled out his phone. Time to call his commanding officer and request emergency leave. He had some personal business to attend to back home. Business that would require his particular set of skills. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. 2 weeks before Dwayne's call from Syria, Carolyn Duffy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, practicing the words she'd rehearsed 100 times. At 31, she still turned heads when she walked into a room, her auburn hair and green eyes drawing attention she'd learned to leverage over the years. But the face staring back at her now looked tired, older than her years. "I can't do this anymore, Dwayne," she whispered to her reflection. "I need someone who's actually here for me and Tommy." The words felt hollow even to her own ears. Dwayne had been deployed for only 3 months this time, shorter than many of his previous missions. But Vincent had been working on her for nearly a year, slowly poisoning her perspective on her marriage with carefully chosen words and expensive gifts. It had started innocently enough. Vincent Swartz had hired her as his personal secretary 2 years ago, when Dwayne's military salary wasn't quite covering their growing expenses and Tommy's private school tuition. The job paid well, suspiciously well, she'd thought at first, but Vincent had explained it as an investment in quality personnel. "Beautiful women make better first impressions," he'd told her during the interview, his gray eyes lingering on her figure in ways that should have been warning signs. And first impressions are everything in construction. What she discovered was that Swartz Construction wasn't exactly a traditional construction company. They specialized in special projects, buildings that needed to be constructed quickly and quietly, often with minimal permits and maximum discretion. Government contracts that required security clearances. Private facilities for clients who preferred to remain anonymous. Vincent himself was a contradiction. 42 years old, never married, with the kind of dangerous charm that made smart women do stupid things. He dressed in expensive suits, drove a Bentley, and lived in a waterfront mansion that would have cost millions in Virginia Beach. All this from a construction business that, on paper, seemed modestly successful at best. The seduction had been gradual and methodical. Expensive lunches to discuss business. Late-night calls when Dwayne was deployed, ostensibly about work emergencies. Gifts for Tommy that were far too expensive for a boss to give an employee's child. Slowly, Vincent had painted a picture of Dwayne as an absent father and husband, a man who chose military glory over his family's needs. "You deserve better than a part-time husband," Vincent had whispered during one of their increasingly frequent dinners. "You deserve a man who can actually provide for you, who can be here when you need him." The affair had begun 6 weeks ago, while Dwayne was in pre-deployment training. Vincent had orchestrated it perfectly, a business trip to Atlanta that required his secretary to accompany him. 1 hotel suite, 2 beds that became one, and a line crossed that Carolyn knew she could never uncross. But it wasn't just the sex, though Vincent was attentive in ways Dwayne had never been. It was the promise of a different life. Vincent had shown her bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. He was worth more than $8 million, he claimed, and he wanted to share it all with her and Tommy. "Marry me," he'd said just last week, presenting her with a ring that cost more than Dwayne made in a year. "Divorce the soldier boy and become Mrs. Vincent Swartz. Tommy will have everything he's ever wanted, and you'll never have to worry about money again." There was just one problem: Dwayne. "He'll never agree to a divorce," Carolyn had protested. "He's military. He thinks marriage is some kind of sacred bond. He'll fight for custody, and with his security clearance and military record, he might win." Vincent's smile had been cold when he'd responded. "Don't worry about your husband, sweetheart. I have friends who specialize in solving problems like that. Soldiers die in combat all the time. Tragic, but these things happen." The implication had been clear, and it should have terrified her. Instead, Carolyn had felt a dark thrill at the thought of being free, truly free, to start over with a man who could give her the life she'd always wanted. Now, as she stared at her reflection, she tried to summon that feeling again. In a few hours, Vincent would arrive to take her and Tommy to dinner, another step in his campaign to win the boys' affection and loyalty. After dinner, they'd return to her house, and Vincent would spend the night in the bed she'd shared with Dwayne for 15 years. It was a test, Vincent had said, to see if she was truly committed to their future together, to prove she was ready to leave the past behind. The sound of small feet running down the hallway broke her from her thoughts. Tommy burst into the bedroom, his 8-year-old face bright with excitement. "Mom, is Mr. Vincent really taking us to that fancy restaurant with the fish tank?" Carolyn forced a smile. "Yes, baby. He wants to spend more time with you." "Cool. Can I tell Dad about it when he calls?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Dwayne called every few days when operational security allowed, and Tommy always lit up when he heard his father's voice. The boy worshipped Dwayne, believed his father was invincible, the strongest man in the world. "Maybe we should keep this as our special secret for now," Carolyn said carefully. "Daddy's very busy with his work, and we don't want to worry him with our fun stuff at home." Tommy's face fell slightly. "But Dad likes to hear about our fun stuff. He always asks what we did while he was gone." "I know, sweetie. But grown-up relationships are complicated. Someday you'll understand." What Tommy didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that Carolyn had been systematically rewriting the narrative of their family for months. Every conversation about Dwayne's absence, every comment about missing Daddy, every question about when he'd be home had been met with subtle redirection. "Daddy chooses to be away," she'd started saying. "He could get a different job, but he likes being a soldier more than being with us." It wasn't true. Dwayne had been trying to transition to a training position that would keep him stateside more often. But Vincent had convinced her that truth was less important than preparing Tommy for the transition to come. The doorbell rang, and Tommy rocketed out of the room toward the front door. Carolyn took one last look at herself in the mirror, straightening her dress and checking her lipstick. Vincent liked her to look perfect, always ready to be shown off. She found him in the entryway, lifting Tommy in the air while the boy giggled with delight. Vincent was dressed in his usual expensive casual wear, designer jeans, and a silk shirt that probably cost more than Carolyn's monthly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile brilliant white and perfectly calculated. "There's my favorite secretary," he said, setting Tommy down and pulling Carolyn into an embrace that lingered just long enough to feel inappropriate in front of the child. "Ready for a night on the town?" As they drove to dinner in Vincent's Bentley, Tommy chattering excitedly in the back seat about school and friends, Carolyn felt a moment of doubt. This was really happening. She was really going to destroy her marriage, break up her family, and potentially orphan her son, all for a man she'd known for 2 years. But then Vincent reached over and squeezed her hand, his fingers cool and confident, and she remembered the bank statements, the promises, the vision of a life without financial stress or military deployments or lonely nights waiting for phone calls that might never come. She squeezed back, sealing their agreement. What she didn't know was that Vincent Swartz had already made a very different kind of call that afternoon, to contacts in Eastern Europe who specialized in making problems disappear. People who could arrange accidents for American soldiers in combat zones. People who would ensure that Dwayne Duffy never made it home to complicate their plans. The irony was perfect. While Carolyn was planning her new life with a wealthy construction magnate, Vincent was planning her widowhood. And neither of them had any idea that the weak mechanic they were betraying had spent 15 years learning how to hunt, and kill people who underestimated him. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Return. Dwayne's boots hit Virginia Beach International Airport tarmac at 1,347 hours on a gray Thursday afternoon. He'd been traveling for 36 hours straight, military transport from Syria to Germany, then commercial flights to Washington and finally home. His duffel bag contained the usual deployment gear, but hidden in a false bottom were items that weren't standard military issue: surveillance equipment, encrypted communication devices, and a collection of identification documents that would have raised eyebrows if discovered. 3 weeks of emergency leave. That's what his commanding officer had authorized after Dwayne's carefully edited report about family emergency requiring immediate attention. What he hadn't told his CO was that he'd also submitted a request for permanent stateside assignment, citing family stability concerns. The request would take months to process, giving him time to complete his real mission: the destruction of Vincent Schwartz and everyone who'd participated in betraying him. But first, intelligence gathering. As any special operations professional knew, rushing into action without proper reconnaissance was a guaranteed way to get killed. And Dwayne intended to be very much alive when this was over. He'd spent the flight home studying everything he could access about Vincent Schwartz through military intelligence databases. The man's file was thicker than it had appeared in Syria, filled with connections that painted a disturbing picture. Schwartz Construction had contracts with 3 different private military corporations, all with questionable reputations. The company had built facilities for clients including arms dealers, human traffickers, and at least 2 organizations on the FBI's terrorism watch list. More troubling was Vincent's financial network. Payments flowing through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, business relationships with Russian oligarchs, and a lifestyle that far exceeded his legitimate business income. The man wasn't just a construction contractor. He was a facilitator for people who operated outside the law. And somehow, Carolyn had become his access point to classified military information. Dwayne collected his rental car, a nondescript gray sedan registered under one of his alternate identities, and drove not toward his family home in Chesapeake, but to a storage facility 30 miles inland. Unit 247 contained equipment he'd accumulated over 15 years of special operations, weapons, surveillance gear, and financial resources that existed completely off any official books. The SEAL teams had unofficial protocols for members who might need to disappear quickly or operate without government backing. Dwayne had been preparing for such a contingency since his first deployment, though he'd never imagined using these resources against his own wife. By nightfall, he was positioned in the woods behind his own house, watching through night vision optics as his life played out without him. The house was exactly as he'd left it: white colonial with blue shutters, Tommy's bicycle on the front porch, Carolyn's car in the driveway. But there was another vehicle there too, a black Bentley that confirmed his worst fears. Through the kitchen window, he watched Vincent Schwartz serving dinner to his wife and son. The man moved through Dwayne's house with casual familiarity, opening cabinets, pouring wine, laughing at something Tommy said. He was wearing Dwayne's apron, a gag gift from last Christmas that read, "World's Best Dad." The rage that filled Dwayne's chest was unlike anything he'd experienced in combat. This wasn't about territory or ideology or national security. This was personal violation of the deepest kind, committed by people who thought they were safe from consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dwayne activated a directional microphone and settled in to listen. The conversation around his dining room table was illuminating in the worst possible way. "Can I call Dad tonight?" Tommy was asking between bites of what looked like takeout from an expensive restaurant. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetie," Carolyn replied, her voice carrying a tone Dwayne had never heard before, dismissive, almost annoyed. "Daddy's very busy with his work. He might not have time to talk." "But he always makes time to talk to me," Tommy protested, "even when he's really far away." Vincent leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that made Dwayne's finger itch for a trigger. "You know, buddy, sometimes adults have to make difficult choices. Your dad chose to be a soldier instead of staying home with you and your mom. That tells you something about his priorities." "What do you mean?" Tommy's voice was small, confused. "I mean, a real man takes care of his family first. He doesn't run off to play war games when his wife and son need him at home." Dwayne watched his 8-year-old son's face crumple with confusion and hurt. The boy who'd counted down days until Daddy's return who'd plastered his bedroom walls with pictures they'd taken together, was being systematically poisoned against the man he'd hero-worshipped his entire life. "But Daddy said he fights bad guys to keep us safe," Tommy whispered. Carolyn reached over and stroked their son's hair, her voice gentle but devastating. "Daddy tells himself that, baby. But the truth is, he could get a different job if he really wanted to. He just likes being a soldier more than being with us." It was exactly what Vincent had trained her to say, Dwayne realized. The systematic destruction of a child's faith in his father, preparing the ground for a replacement. "Tell you what, sport," Vincent said, producing a wrapped package from beside his chair. "I got you something to cheer you up." Tommy opened it to reveal the latest gaming console, something that cost $600 and had been at the top of his Christmas list. Dwayne had planned to surprise him with it when he got home. "Wow. Thanks, Mr. Vincent." Tommy's face lit up with genuine joy, and Vincent basked in the gratitude. "That's what men do for the people they care about," Vincent said, shooting a meaningful look at Carolyn. "They don't just promise things someday, they deliver right now." After dinner, Dwayne watched Vincent help with Tommy's bedtime routine, reading stories and tucking him in with casual intimacy that spoke of months of practice. When they finally retreated to the master bedroom, his bedroom, Dwayne had to physically restrain himself from storming the house. But he was a professional. Emotion was useful only when channeled into effective action. And effective action required patience, planning, and precision. He spent the next 4 hours conducting detailed surveillance of the property, noting security weaknesses, establishing sight lines, and confirming that Vincent had indeed made himself completely at home. The man's Bentley was parked in Dwayne's spot in the garage. His clothes hung in Dwayne's closet. His toiletries sat on Dwayne's bathroom counter. At 0300 hours, Dwayne slipped into the house through a basement window he deliberately left unsecured for exactly this type of scenario. Moving through his own home like a ghost, he planted surveillance devices in key locations: the master bedroom, kitchen, Vincent's car, and Carolyn's purse. He also accessed Carolyn's laptop and Vincent's phone, installing tracking software that would monitor their communications, location, and contacts. Within hours, he'd have complete intelligence on their activities, plans, and connections. But most importantly, he accessed the home security system and installed his own modifications. From now on, every entry and exit would be monitored, every conversation recorded, every movement tracked. His house had become an intelligence collection platform, and his wife and her lover were unwitting assets providing him with everything he needed to destroy them. As dawn broke over Virginia Beach, Dwayne was back in his surveillance position, watching Vincent prepare for another day of playing house with his family. The man kissed Carolyn goodbye at the front door, ruffled Tommy's hair, and drove off to work in the Bentley, completely unaware that his every move was now being monitored by someone who'd spent 15 years learning how to hunt and kill people who made the mistake of becoming his enemies. Phase 1 was complete, intelligence gathering. Phase 2 would be more active, inserting himself into their lives in ways they'd never expect, manipulating their environment, and beginning the systematic destruction of everything they thought they'd built on the ruins of his marriage. Vincent Schwartz thought he was playing house with a soldier's wife while the soldier was safely deployed thousands of miles away. Carolyn thought she'd found a better man and a better life, and that her inconvenient husband would never return to complicate things. They were both about to discover that Dwayne Duffy had come home, and home was about to become a very dangerous place for people who'd betrayed him. Chapter 4: Ghost in the Machine. Maureen Webb sat in her daughter's kitchen, her weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as she watched her grandson play with his expensive new gaming console. At 68, Carolyn's mother had raised 5 children through 2 wars and knew the look of a woman making the biggest mistake of her life. "You sure you know what you're doing, Carrie?" she asked, using her daughter's childhood nickname. "That man's been awful generous with gifts for someone who's just your boss." Carolyn glanced nervously toward the living room where Tommy was absorbed in his game, then lowered her voice. "Mom, Vincent cares about us. He wants to take care of Tommy and me. What about Dwayne? That boy's been good to you for 15 years. He loves you and Tommy more than life itself." "Dwayne's never here," Carolyn snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm tired of being a single mother, Mom. I'm tired of raising Tommy alone, of worrying every day whether his father's coming home in a box." Maureen studied her daughter's face, noting the expensive highlights in her hair, the designer clothes, the jewelry that definitely hadn't come from a Navy SEAL's salary. Honey, I've seen enough marriages to know the difference between grass being greener and grass being poisoned. This Vincent fellow, there's something about him that doesn't sit right. Before Carolyn could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Maureen asked. Vincent's stuck in meetings all day. He was supposed to take Tommy to that new indoor climbing place, but now he can't make it. Tommy's voice drifted from the living room. Is Mr. Vincent coming over today? Carolyn called back. Not today, sweetie. He's busy with work. The disappointment in Tommy's voice was audible. He promised we'd go climbing. What none of them knew was that Vincent wasn't stuck in meetings. He was sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles away, staring at his phone where a text message had just appeared from an unknown number. Your climbing plans have been canceled. We need to talk. Come alone to Pier 9, Marina District. 1 hour. Vincent's hands shook slightly as he read the message. In his line of work, anonymous communications meant one of two things: law enforcement or people even more dangerous than law enforcement. His contacts in Eastern Europe had been unusually quiet lately, and the military contractor who'd promised to handle the Dwayne Duffy problem had stopped returning his calls. An hour later, Vincent stood at the end of Pier 9, looking out over the gray waters of the Chesapeake Bay. The marina was nearly empty on a weekday afternoon, just a few scattered boats and the distant sound of seagulls. He'd chosen to come armed, a 9mm Glock tucked under his jacket, though he had no idea what he was walking into. Vincent Swartz. The voice came from behind him, calm and professional. Vincent spun around to see a man in dark clothing emerging from behind a storage building. Tall, lean, with the kind of predatory stillness that marked him as military or ex-military. His face was weathered, his eyes the color of winter ice. Who the hell are you? Vincent demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. I wouldn't, the stranger said mildly. Your 9mm is loaded with hollow points, 15-round magazine, 1 in the chamber. But you're not fast enough, and I'm not here to kill you. Yet. Vincent's blood turned cold. How did you know about your weapon? Same way I know about the $8.7 million in your Cayman Islands account. Same way I know about your contracts with Volkov Arms, your business relationship with the Kozlov family, and your recent attempt to arrange the death of an active-duty Navy SEAL. The stranger stepped closer, and Vincent saw something in those ice-gray eyes that made his bladder threaten to empty. This man had killed before. Many times. My name is Staff Sergeant Luke Hamilton, 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company, United States Marine Corps. I'm here representing certain interested parties who are very displeased with your recent activities. Vincent tried to maintain his composure, but his voice cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 weeks ago, you provided classified mission coordinates to hostile forces in Syria. Those coordinates resulted in an ambush that could have killed 5 American servicemen. That makes you guilty of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and providing material support to terrorist organizations. You're insane, Vincent stammered. I'm a construction contractor. I don't have access to military information. Luke Hamilton smiled, and it was like watching a shark bare its teeth. No, but your girlfriend does. Carolyn Duffy has been pillow-talking classified information to you for months, probably without even realizing it. Her husband mentions mission timelines, deployment locations, target packages, all very general, nothing that seems important to a civilian. But you're connected to people who know how to piece together those fragments into actionable intelligence. Vincent's mind raced. How could this Marine know about his conversations with Carolyn? How could he know about the connections to Eastern European arms dealers? Here's what's going to happen, Luke continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. You're going to walk away from Carolyn Duffy and her son. You're going to dissolve your business relationships with anyone connected to foreign intelligence services. And you're going to pray that the interested parties I represent decide you're more useful alive than dead. And if I don't, Luke reached into his jacket and produced a manila envelope. Then your business partners in Minsk are going to receive detailed information about your cooperation with U.S. intelligence services, along with documentation of every illegal transaction you've ever made through your shell companies. How long do you think you'd survive after they realize you're a security risk? Vincent opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, Him meeting with FBI agents who'd never contacted him, documents bearing his signature authorizing cooperation with federal investigations that had never happened, bank records showing payments from the U.S. Treasury that had never been made. All perfectly fabricated, all completely convincing. "This is fake," he whispered. "Try proving that to Viktor Kozlov when his arms shipments start getting intercepted by customs. Try explaining to the Volkov brothers why their money laundering operation suddenly has federal scrutiny." Vincent realized he was trapped in a web he couldn't even see clearly. Whoever this Luke Hamilton was, he represented people with resources Vincent couldn't match and skills Vincent couldn't counter. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to disappear from Carolyn Duffy's life. Today. Clean break. No explanation, no contact. Move your operations somewhere far from Virginia Beach and never come back. She'll ask questions. She'll want to know why. Tell her you found out her husband isn't just a mechanic. Tell her Dwayne Duffy is special operations, and people like that don't forgive or forget when someone threatens their family. Tell her anything you want, but make it clear that continuing this relationship would be dangerous for everyone involved." Vincent stared at the photographs again, his mind calculating odds and outcomes. If even half of what this Marine was implying was true, his carefully constructed life was built on sand that was already shifting beneath his feet. "How do I know you won't use this against me anyway?" Luke Hamilton's smile turned genuinely amused. "Because we're professionals, Mr. Swartz. We don't start wars we don't need to fight. Walk away now, and this conversation never happened. Try to be clever, try to call our bluff, and you'll discover exactly how many ways a trained killer can make someone disappear without leaving evidence." 20 minutes later, Vincent sat in his Bentley in the restaurant parking lot where he was supposed to meet Carolyn for lunch, staring at his phone. 3 missed calls from her, 2 text messages asking where he was. He thought about the bank accounts, the property, the life he'd built over 15 years of careful criminal networking. Then he thought about ice gray eyes and the casual way Luke Hamilton had described making people disappear. With shaking fingers, he typed a response to Carolyn. "Something's come up. Can't make lunch. We'll call you later." But even as he sent the message, Vincent Swartz knew he would never call Carolyn Duffy again. Whatever game he'd thought he was playing, he'd just discovered there were players in it with resources and capabilities that made his own connections look like children with toy guns. What he didn't know was that Staff Sergeant Luke Hamilton was currently driving away from the marina in a rented sedan, pulling off a fake mustache and colored contact lenses. The man was actually Chief Petty Officer Dwayne Duffy, using skills he'd developed over 15 years of covert operations to eliminate a threat to his family in the most efficient way possible. Sometimes the best way to destroy an enemy wasn't through violence. Sometimes it was through making them destroy themselves. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Carolyn stared at her phone for the 15th time in an hour, the unanswered text messages to Vincent glowing on the screen like accusations. 3 days had passed since his abrupt cancellation of their lunch date, and she hadn't heard a word from him since. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Something was wrong. Vincent Swartz was many things, but inconsistent wasn't one of them. For over a year, he'd been relentlessly attentive, showering her with calls, gifts, and attention. Men like that didn't just vanish without explanation. "Mom, you okay?" Tommy looked up from his homework at the kitchen table, his 8-year-old face scrunched with concern. "You look sad." Carolyn forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking about work stuff." But she wasn't fine. Vincent's sudden absence had left a void that was rapidly filling with doubt and panic. The pregnancy test hidden in her purse had confirmed her worst fear 2 days ago. She was carrying Vincent's child. The timing made it impossible for the baby to be Dwayne's, and she'd been counting on Vincent's promises of marriage and financial security to navigate the disaster her life was about to become. Now Vincent had disappeared, and Dwayne was coming home from deployment in less than a week. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, and her heart leaped with desperate hope. But the caller ID showed her mother's number, not Vincent's. "Hi, Mom. Carrie, honey, I've been thinking about what we discussed the other day. About you and Dwayne and this Vincent fellow. Mom, I really don't want to. Just listen to me for a minute. I called my sister Agnes this morning. You remember Agnes, married to that Marine for 30 years? She told me something interesting about military marriages." Carolyn sank into a chair, dread building in her stomach. "What did she tell you?" She said military wives sometimes get targeted by con artists. Men who specifically look for women whose husbands are deployed, who feed them lines about better lives and bigger bank accounts. She said these men study their targets, learn exactly what to say to make lonely wives feel special. Vincent's not a con artist, Mom. He owns a construction company. I've seen his house, his cars. Have you seen his tax returns? His business licenses? Agnes said these men are real good at creating impressive facades. Vincent could be renting that house, leasing those cars, running his whole operation on credit and criminal money. The words hit Carolyn like physical blows because they echoed doubts she'd been suppressing for weeks. Vincent's wealth had always seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed to her needs. And his sudden disappearance was starting to feel less like a communication problem and more like an escape plan. I have to go, Mom. Tommy needs help with his homework. She hung up before her mother could respond, but the conversation had planted seeds of panic that were already taking root. If Vincent was really gone, if this had all been some elaborate scheme, she was about to face the consequences alone. Pregnant with another man's child, husband returning from deployment, financial records that would show expensive gifts and unexplained income, phone records that would document months of secret communications. For the first time since the affair began, Carolyn truly considered what Dwayne's reaction would be when he discovered her betrayal. He'd been patient with her moods, understanding about her loneliness, supportive of her career choices. But he was also a soldier trained to identify and eliminate threats. What would a man like that do to someone who'd betrayed him with such calculated cruelty? Her phone buzzed again, and this time hope and dread warred in her chest as she saw Vincent's name on the screen. She answered before the first ring finished. Vincent. Thank God. I've been so worried. Carolyn. His voice was flat, distant, nothing like the warm tones she'd grown accustomed to. We need to talk. Yes, we do. Where have you been? I've been calling and texting. I've been thinking. About us, about this whole situation. I think we've made a mistake. The words hit her like ice water. What do you mean? I mean this thing between us, it's gotten too complicated. You're married. You have a kid. Your husband's military. I never should have let it go this far. Carolyn's voice rose to nearly a shout. Vincent, I'm pregnant. Silence stretched across the phone line for 10 seconds that felt like hours. Are you sure? He asked finally. I took 3 tests. They were all positive. The timing. Vincent, this baby is yours. Another long pause. When Vincent spoke again, his voice was cold, businesslike. That's unfortunate. But it doesn't change the fact that this relationship needs to end. Today. You can't be serious. We've been planning our future together. The ring, the promises, everything you said about Tommy and me. I got carried away. I said things I shouldn't have said, made promises I can't keep. Your husband's coming home soon. And when he does, he's going to have questions. Questions I don't want to be around to answer. Carolyn felt the world tilting beneath her feet. What are you talking about? You said Dwayne was just a mechanic, that he wasn't smart enough to figure anything out. I was wrong about that. Very wrong. Carolyn, your husband isn't just a mechanic. He's special operations. Navy SEALs. And people like that don't just divorce unfaithful wives. They destroy them. The words barely registered. Navy SEALs. That was impossible. Dwayne had always been secretive about his work, but he'd told her he was a maintenance technician. He'd shown her military manuals about engine repair, talked about working on vehicles and equipment. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Think about it, Carolyn. Really think. How many maintenance techs disappear for months at a time on classified missions? How many mechanics need the level of security clearance your husband has? How many engine specialists come home with the kind of scars and nightmares Dwayne carries? As Vincent spoke, pieces began clicking into place in Carolyn's mind. The phone calls that cut off abruptly when she entered the room. The way Dwayne moved through their house at night, checking locks and windows like a man expecting attack. The casual way he'd once disarmed a mugger in downtown Norfolk, dropping the man unconscious before Carolyn had even realized what was happening. He lied to me, she said numbly. He protected you. There's a difference. But the point is, when he comes home and finds out what we've been doing, he's going to have access to resources and skills that make civilian divorce lawyers look like kindergartners. I'm not going to be around when that happens. Vincent, please. The baby is your problem to solve. I'm leaving Virginia Beach tonight. Don't try to contact me again. Don't tell anyone about our relationship, and pray your husband never finds out I existed." The line went dead, leaving Carolyn staring at her phone in numb shock. Outside, she could hear Tommy playing in the backyard, his laughter a bitter contrast to the disaster unfolding in her kitchen. Pregnant with her lover's child. Husband coming home in 5 days. Lover vanished without a trace, abandoning her to face the consequences alone. For the first time since the affair began, Carolyn Duffy realized she might have destroyed her life for nothing more than expensive lies and empty promises. And if Vincent was right about Dwayne's real profession, the man coming home to discover her betrayal wasn't the patient, understanding husband she'd taken for granted. He was a trained killer who specialized in eliminating threats to national security. And she had just made herself the biggest threat to his family's security imaginable. What Carolyn didn't know was that Vincent's sudden attack of conscience had nothing to do with moral awakening and everything to do with the ice-gray eyes of a man who'd offered him a choice between disappearing voluntarily or being made to disappear permanently. What she also didn't know was that her husband was currently sitting in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, listening to every word of their conversation through the devices he'd planted in her phone 3 days earlier. Dwayne Duffy had successfully eliminated the immediate threat of Vincent Swartz using psychological warfare instead of physical violence. Now came the more difficult challenge, deciding what to do about a wife who'd betrayed him with calculating cruelty and was now carrying another man's child. The answer to that question would determine whether Carolyn Duffy had any future at all. Chapter 6. The Art of Psychological Warfare. The text message arrived on Carolyn's phone at 2:17 a.m., jerking her awake from restless sleep. "Hey beautiful, missing you tonight. Can't wait to see you when I get home. Love, D." She stared at the message in the darkness of her bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dwayne wasn't supposed to be home for 3 more days. His deployment schedule had always been precise, predictable. He'd never come home early without warning. But there was something else wrong with the message. Dwayne had never called her beautiful in a text. He wasn't the type for casual endearments via phone. And the message felt off, like someone trying to imitate his usual communication style, but missing some subtle element that only a wife would notice. She typed back, "When will you be home exactly?" The response came immediately, "Soon. We need to talk about Tommy's future. And yours." The words sent ice water through her veins. There was a threat buried in that casual message, a suggestion that he knew more than he was saying. But how was that possible? Vincent had vanished 4 days ago, leaving no trace of their relationship behind. She'd already disposed of the gifts, deleted their text messages, and removed any evidence of the affair from her phone and computer. Or had she? Carolyn crept downstairs to her laptop, her paranoia growing with each step. She'd cleared her browser history, but were there deeper records she didn't know about? Digital footprints that someone with technical skills could uncover? As she opened the computer, another text arrived. "Couldn't sleep either? We're more connected than you think." This time she was certain. Dwayne was watching her. Somehow, from wherever he was, he knew she was awake and using her computer. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If he could monitor her activities in real time, what else did he know? Her phone rang, the sound splitting the night's silence like a gunshot. Dwayne's name on the caller ID. "Hello." Her voice came out as a croak. "Hey, baby." His voice was warm, familiar, exactly as she remembered. "Sorry to wake you, but I got some good news. Mission wrapped up early. I'll be home tomorrow instead of Friday." Tomorrow. Less than 18 hours to figure out how to explain a pregnancy that couldn't be his, financial records showing unexplained income, and the complete absence of a man who'd been central to her life for months. That's wonderful, she managed. "Tommy will be so excited. How is our boy? I missed his call yesterday. Everything okay at home?" The question was innocent enough, but something in Dwayne's tone made her skin crawl. It was the voice of a man who already knew the answers, but was testing her responses. "He's fine. Same as always. School, friends, video games. Good. And you? How are you feeling?" The emphasis on feeling was almost imperceptible, but it hit her like a slap. Did he know about the pregnancy? Had her doctor's office somehow been compromised? Or was she reading meanings into innocent words because guilt was eating her alive? "I'm fine too. Just tired. You know how it is when you're not here." "I do know," Dwayne said quietly. "I know exactly how things are when I'm not there." The line went dead, leaving Carolyn staring at her phone in growing terror. The man she'd lived with for 15 years, the patient husband she'd taken for granted, was coming home with knowledge she couldn't explain and capabilities she'd never understood. Vincent's words echoed in her memory. Navy SEALs. People like that don't just divorce unfaithful wives, they destroy them. She spent the rest of the night frantically searching the house for anything that might reveal her affair, but found nothing. Either she'd been more careful than she'd thought, or someone had already cleaned up the evidence. The second possibility was far more terrifying than the first. At 6 a.m., she called her mother. "Mom, I need you to take Tommy for a few days. Dwayne's coming home early, and I think there might be some problems." "What kind of problems, honey?" Carolyn couldn't bring herself to admit the truth over the phone. "Just some things we need to work out privately. Can you pick Tommy up from school today and keep him through the weekend?" "Of course, but Carrie, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "I'll explain later. Just please, keep Tommy safe until I call you." She hung up before her mother could ask more questions, then sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and watching the clock crawl toward evening. Every car that passed made her jump. Every phone buzz sent adrenaline surging through her system. At 4 p.m., Tommy burst through the front door with his usual after-school energy. "Mom, guess what? Grandma's picking me up for a sleepover. She said Dad's coming home early." Carolyn forced enthusiasm into her voice. "That's right, baby. Daddy wants to surprise you. So you'll stay with Grandma tonight and see him tomorrow." "But I want to see him tonight. I haven't seen Dad in forever." The pain in Tommy's voice cut through her like a blade. Her son had been counting down the days until his father's return, and now she was denying him those precious first hours because she was terrified of what Dwayne might do or say in front of the child. "Tomorrow, Tommy. I promise." When her mother arrived to collect Tommy, Maureen took one look at Carolyn's face and pulled her aside. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mom, if something happens to me." "Carolyn Elizabeth Webb Duffy, what are you talking about? Just promise me you'll take care of Tommy. Whatever happens between Dwayne and me, promise me you'll make sure Tommy's okay." Maureen gripped her daughter's shoulders. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Dwayne loves you. He's never raised a hand to you in 15 years. But as she watched her mother drive away with Tommy in the back seat, Carolyn wondered if love was stronger than betrayal. She wondered if 15 years of marriage could survive one phone call that had revealed the true nature of the man she'd married. Most of all, she wondered if the patient, understanding husband she'd taken for granted still existed, or if that man had died in a Syrian desert when he discovered his wife's ultimate betrayal. At 8:47 p.m., headlights swept across the living room windows. A car door slammed. Footsteps approached the front porch with military precision. Carolyn stood in the center of her living room, pregnant with another man's child, waiting for her Navy SEAL husband to come home and judge her for crimes she was only beginning to understand. The front door opened with the soft click of a key in the lock, and Dwayne Duffy stepped into his house for the first time in 3 months. He looked exactly as she remembered, lean, weathered, dangerous in ways she'd never fully appreciated. But his eyes, those gray eyes she'd fallen in love with 16 years ago, were different now. They were the eyes of a stranger, a predator evaluating prey. "Hello, Carolyn," he said quietly, setting down his duffel bag with careful precision. "We need to talk." Chapter 7, The Reckoning. Dwayne stood in his own doorway, studying the woman he'd married 16 years ago with the same clinical detachment he'd once used to evaluate enemy positions. Carolyn looked smaller than he remembered, fragile in her expensive clothes and jewelry that definitely hadn't come from his military salary. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her hair, a nervous gesture he'd seen 1,000 times but never understood as fear. "You look good," he said, stepping into the living room and closing the door behind him. "New clothes? New haircut? Someone's been taking care of you while I was gone." "Dwayne, she started, but he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that I've had a lot of time to think during the flight home. Time to process some information that came to my attention while I was deployed." He moved through the room like a man conducting a security sweep, noting changes, improvements, additions. Everything was exactly as it should be for a woman who'd been living alone with their son. Too perfect. Too clean. "Where's Tommy?" he asked. He's staying with my mother tonight. I thought we might need some privacy to catch up." Dwayne nodded slowly. "Smart. This conversation definitely requires privacy. He settled into his favorite chair, the recliner where he'd spent countless evenings watching television with his family, and gestured for Carolyn to sit on the couch across from him. The furniture arrangement created a natural interrogation setup, with him positioned to read her body language while maintaining psychological dominance. "Tell me about Vincent Schwartz," he said without preamble. The blood drained from Carolyn's face so completely that for a moment he thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. "Who?" "Vincent Schwartz. Your boss. The man who's been calling our house, taking you to expensive dinners, and buying our son gifts that cost more than I make in a month. That Vincent Schwartz." Carolyn's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "He's just my boss, Dwayne. He's been nice to Tommy and me while you were gone, but it's not what you're thinking." "What am I thinking, Carolyn?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. She stared at him, searching his face for some hint of his knowledge, his intentions, his state of mind. What she saw there terrified her more than any accusation could have. Dwayne looked patient. Completely, utterly patient, like a man who had all the time in the world to extract the truth from someone who'd made the mistake of lying to him. "I'm thinking," he said conversationally, "that my wife has been having an affair with a man who facilitates arms deals for Eastern European criminal organizations. I'm thinking that during our pillow talk conversations about my deployments, you've been feeding information to someone who passed it along to people who want American soldiers dead. I'm thinking you've been playing house with a criminal while our son watched, teaching our boy to call another man daddy while his real father dodged bullets in a desert." Each word hit Carolyn like a physical blow. The casual way Dwayne delivered the accusations, the complete absence of emotion in his voice, was more terrifying than screaming would have been. "That's not. I never knew about any criminal activities. Vincent told me he was in construction. I would never." "You would never what, Carolyn? Betray your husband? Endanger your family? Put your son's future at risk for expensive jewelry and empty promises?" Dwayne reached into his jacket and produced a manila folder, placing it on the coffee table between them. "Would you like to see the evidence? The financial records showing payments into your personal account? The surveillance photos of you entering hotel rooms with Vincent? The recorded phone conversations where you discuss our marriage like it's something that needs to be disposed of?" Carolyn stared at the folder like it contained a live grenade. "You've been spying on me? I've been protecting my family from a security threat. Unfortunately, it turns out the threat was coming from inside my own house." He leaned forward slightly, and Carolyn instinctively pressed herself back into the couch cushions. "Here's what I know, and please don't insult my intelligence by continuing to lie. You've been having an affair with Vincent Schwartz for approximately 6 weeks. You've received gifts and payments totaling just over $47,000. You've provided him with information about my deployment schedules, mission parameters, and operational security protocols. You've allowed him to develop a relationship with our son as preparation for replacing me as Tommy's father figure." Dwayne's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had gone completely cold. "Most importantly, you're currently pregnant with his child, which presents us with some very difficult decisions about the future." The last revelation hit Carolyn like a sledgehammer. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I'm not actually a mechanic, Carolyn. I'm Chief Petty Officer Dwayne Duffy, Naval Special Warfare Command. I've spent 15 years learning how to gather intelligence on people who think they're smarter than I am. Monitoring your medical records was elementary compared to some of the things I've done professionally." For the first time since he'd entered the house, emotion crept into Dwayne's voice. Not anger, something much colder. "The question now is what we do about it." Carolyn found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've committed adultery, conspiracy, and potentially treason. You've endangered our son, betrayed our marriage, and participated in activities that could have resulted in the deaths of American soldiers. In some countries, some of those charges carry a death sentence." The words hit her like ice water. "You're talking about divorce." Dwayne was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the expression of a man solving a complex tactical problem. "Actually, I'm talking about something much more permanent than divorce." The threat in those words was unmistakable, and Carolyn felt her bladder threaten to empty. This wasn't the patient, understanding husband she'd lived with for 15 years. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous, someone who spoke about permanent solutions like a man who'd implemented them before. Dwayne, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can get counseling. We can. Can we work through the fact that you're carrying another man's child? Can we work through the fact that you've spent months teaching our son to love your lover more than his own father? Can we work through the fact that your pillow talk nearly got me killed in Syria? Each question was delivered with surgical precision, cutting away her arguments before she could voice them. Carolyn realized she was facing a level of tactical thinking she'd never suspected her husband possessed. Where is Vincent now? Dwayne asked. I don't know. He disappeared 4 days ago. Just stopped returning my calls, stopped contacting me entirely. Did he say why? Carolyn hesitated, remembering Vincent's terrified voice during their last conversation. He said you weren't really a mechanic. He said you were special operations, and that people like you don't forgive wives who cheat. Dwayne's smile was thin and completely without warmth. Vincent Swartz is smarter than I gave him credit for. Not smart enough to avoid getting involved with my wife, but smart enough to run when he realized what that meant. He stood up, moving to the window and peering out at the street like a man expecting company. The problem is, Carolyn, that running away doesn't erase what he did. And it certainly doesn't erase what you did. What are you going to do? She whispered. Dwayne turned back to face her, and in his expression she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. It was the look of a man who'd already made his decision, who was simply determining the most efficient way to implement it. I'm going to eliminate the threats to my family's security, he said quietly. All of them. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Carolyn realized that the patient, forgiving husband she'd counted on no longer existed. In his place stood a trained killer who'd just classified her as an enemy combatant. And she was about to discover exactly what Navy SEALs did to enemy combatants who made the mistake of threatening the people they loved. Chapter 8. Endgame. The call came at 3:47 a.m., dragging Vincent Swartz from restless sleep in his motel room outside Richmond. He'd been hiding for 6 days now, moving between cheap motels and paying cash for everything. But somehow they'd found his number. Vincent. The voice was calm, professional, familiar. Luke Hamilton, the Marine who'd threatened him at the marina. I did what you asked, Vincent said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. I ended it with Carolyn. I left Virginia Beach. I haven't contacted her since. I know. That's not why I'm calling. Vincent sat up in the stained motel bed, fully awake now. Then what do you want? I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because your life depends on understanding every word. The line crackled with static for a moment before Luke continued. Dwayne Duffy came home yesterday. He knows everything about your relationship with his wife, everything about your business connections, everything about the classified information you've been trafficking. He also knows Carolyn is pregnant with your child. Vincent's blood turned to ice water. How could he know that? Because he's not the man you thought you were playing games with. Chief Petty Officer Dwayne Duffy is one of the most dangerous people you'll ever encounter, and you made the mistake of threatening the two things he values most in this world, his son and his honor. But I'm gone. I'm not a threat to anyone anymore. Luke's laugh was devoid of humor. You got his wife pregnant, Vincent. You turned his son against him. You nearly got him killed in Syria. Running away doesn't undo any of that. Vincent tried to keep the panic out of his voice. What does he want? He wants you dead. But more than that, he wants you to suffer first. He wants you to experience the same fear and helplessness you put him through when you thought you were safe thousands of miles away. You said if I left Carolyn alone. I said the interested parties I represented wouldn't start a war they didn't need to fight. But Dwayne Duffy isn't interested in avoiding war, Vincent. He's interested in winning it. Vincent fumbled for the lamp, flooding the dingy motel room with harsh light. Are you saying you can't protect me? I'm saying I never could. The Marine you met at the marina doesn't exist, Vincent. That was Dwayne himself, using psychological warfare to remove you from his wife's life without having to kill you in front of his son. He wanted you gone cleanly, quietly, with minimal collateral damage. The revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. He'd been manipulated from the beginning, outmaneuvered by someone he'd never seen coming. The fake documents, the threats about my business partners. All real. Dwayne has been building a case against you for weeks, documenting every illegal transaction, every criminal connection, every vulnerable point in your operation. If he wanted to destroy you through legal channels, he could have you arrested and convicted within a month. But he doesn't want legal channels, Vincent whispered, understanding flooding through him like poison. No, he wants personal justice, the kind that can't be appealed or overturned or plea bargained away. Vincent's hands shook as he reached for his car keys. I'll disappear. Leave the country. You'll never see me again. Where will you go, Vincent? You've stolen money from Russian arms dealers, betrayed terrorist organizations, and seduced the wife of a Navy SEAL. How many places on earth do you think you'll be safe? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Vincent realized he'd walked into a trap that had been months in the making, constructed by someone who understood warfare in ways Vincent couldn't begin to comprehend. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to understand that this was never about money or sex or jealousy. This was about you threatening the family of someone who kills people professionally. The only reason you're still alive is because Dwayne wanted his son to have plausible deniability about what happened to Mommy's boyfriend. Vincent felt his bowels threaten to empty. What happened to Carolyn? Carolyn made choices. Now she's living with the consequences. The line went dead, leaving Vincent staring at his phone in the harsh motel room light. For the first time since the affair began, he truly understood the magnitude of what he'd done. He hadn't seduced a lonely military wife. He'd declared war on a trained killer who specialized in eliminating threats to national security. And now that killer was coming for him. Vincent dressed quickly, throwing his few possessions into a duffel bag. He had maybe 12 hours before they tracked him to this location. His best chance was to reach the Canadian border, but even that felt futile. How do you hide from someone who'd spent 15 years hunting people professionally? As he checked out of the motel, paying cash and avoiding eye contact with the clerk, Vincent's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Running won't help, but it makes the hunt more interesting. See you soon. D. The message was accompanied by a photo that made Vincent's knees buckle. Himself, taken through the motel room window just moments before. Someone had been watching him the entire time, close enough to kill him whenever they chose. But they weren't going to kill him quickly. They were going to make him run, make him sweat, make him experience the same terror he'd inflicted on others through his criminal activities. This was going to be a lesson, not just an execution. Vincent stumbled toward his car, knowing he was already dead but unable to stop trying to survive. Behind him, in the shadows of the motel parking lot, ice-gray eyes watched with the patience of a predator who knew exactly how this hunt would end. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in Virginia Beach, Maureen Webb sat in her kitchen with her 8-year-old grandson, watching the morning news with growing dread. The lead story was about a house fire in Chesapeake, a tragic accident that had claimed the life of a young mother while her Navy SEAL husband was deployed overseas. When is Mommy coming to get me? Tommy asked, not understanding why his grandmother kept crying every time he mentioned his parents. Maureen pulled the boy closer, her heart breaking for the innocence that was about to be shattered. She'd received the call from Dwayne at midnight. Calm, matter-of-fact, instructive. Carolyn had been in an accident. There would be investigations, questions, eventually a funeral. Tommy was to stay with his grandmother until things were settled. What Maureen didn't know, what she would never know, was that the house fire hadn't been an accident. It had been staged with military precision, designed to eliminate evidence and witnesses while providing plausible deniability for a grieving widower who'd lost his wife to a tragic electrical fault while he was serving his country overseas. Carolyn Duffy had learned too late that some betrayals carry consequences that can't be survived. And Vincent Swartz was about to discover that running from a Navy SEAL was like playing hide-and-seek with death itself. The hunt was almost over. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Dwayne stood in the cemetery overlooking Chesapeake Bay, a single white rose in his weathered hand. The headstone was simple, elegant. Carolyn Marie Duffy, beloved wife and mother. The inscription was a lie, but lies were sometimes kinder than truth, especially for an 8-year-old boy who needed to believe his mother had been something better than she was. Tommy stood beside him, clutching his grandmother's hand, dressed in his Sunday best for their monthly visit. The boy had aged in the months since the fire, developed a seriousness that broke Dwayne's heart. But he was healing, slowly learning to trust his father again after months of poison had been systematically drained from his young mind. Can we go see the boats now, Dad? Tommy asked, his voice small but hopeful. Of course, buddy. Dwayne placed the rose on the grave, said a silent prayer for forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved, and led his son toward the harbor where fishing boats were returning with the morning catch. The official investigation into Carolyn's death had concluded exactly as Dwayne had engineered it: faulty electrical wiring in an older home, a tragic accident that occurred while her husband was serving overseas. The insurance investigation had been more thorough, but 15 years of special operations had taught Dwayne how to create accidents that would satisfy even the most suspicious investigators. Vincent Swartz had been found 3 days after Carolyn's death, his car wrapped around a tree on a rural highway outside Roanoke. The state police ruled it a single-vehicle accident, a man driving too fast on unfamiliar roads, probably fleeing debt or domestic problems. They never found the small device that had caused his steering to lock up at precisely the right moment, never questioned why a man with $8 million in offshore accounts would be running from anything. The subsequent investigation into Swartz Construction had revealed a network of criminal activity that stretched from Virginia Beach to Moscow. Federal agents had seized assets, arrested associates, and dismantled an organization that had been facilitating everything from arms dealing to human trafficking. The media portrayed Vincent as a criminal mastermind whose death had ended a major security threat. None of the reports mentioned his affair with a Navy SEAL's wife, or the classified information that had nearly cost American lives in Syria. Those details were classified, buried in files that would never see public scrutiny. "Dad, look." Tommy pointed excitedly at a fishing boat where the crew was unloading their catch. "Can we buy some fish for dinner?" "Absolutely. Let's go talk to the captain." As they walked toward the docks, Dwayne reflected on the changes in his life. He'd accepted a permanent stateside assignment, training new SEAL recruits at the Naval Special Warfare Center. The job kept him home every night, allowed him to be the father Tommy needed, the father he should have been all along. Maureen Webb had been invaluable during the transition, helping Tommy process his grief while gradually revealing that his mother hadn't been perfect. She'd done it carefully, age-appropriately, helping the boy understand that loving someone didn't mean pretending they hadn't made mistakes. "Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world," she told Tommy one evening when the boy asked why his father seemed so sad. "And sometimes people who love us have to make very difficult decisions to keep us safe." The boy had accepted this with the resilience of childhood, gradually transferring his hero worship from Vincent Swartz back to his father where it belonged. Dwayne had worked tirelessly to earn that trust again, attending every school event, coaching Tommy's baseball team, being present in ways he'd never prioritized before. "Dad, why don't you date anyone?" Tommy asked as they approached the fishing boat, his question catching Dwayne off guard. "What do you mean, buddy?" "Some of my friends' dads who got divorced started dating new ladies. But you never do." Dwayne considered his answer carefully. The truth was that he'd lost his ability to trust completely, to make himself vulnerable to someone who might betray him again. Carolyn's betrayal had changed something fundamental in his character, made him understand that the people closest to you were often the most dangerous. "I'm happy just being your dad right now," he said finally. "Maybe someday I'll meet someone special, but you're the most important person in my life." Tommy seemed satisfied with this answer, running ahead to examine the day's catch while Dwayne followed at a measured pace. The truth was more complicated. He dated occasionally, maintained relationships with women who understood his emotional limitations, but he never brought them home, never let them meet Tommy, never allowed them to become part of his real life. The boy was the only person on earth he trusted completely now, the only relationship worth the risk of vulnerability. Everyone else was a potential security threat, evaluated and managed accordingly. His phone buzzed with a text from his commanding officer. New assignment possibility. Embassy security detail in London. Excellent for your career. Interested? Dwayne deleted the message without responding. His career had cost him too much already. His marriage, his family's security, his ability to trust. From now on, his priority was being the father Tommy deserved, the man he should have been before ambition and duty had blinded him to what really mattered. "Dad, the captain said he'll sell us a whole fish. Can we cook it on the grill tonight?" "Sounds perfect, buddy. Let's pick out a good one." As they negotiated with the fishing boat captain, Dwayne caught sight of a familiar figure watching them from the parking lot. Rex Dodd, his former teammate, now assigned to a training position at Dam Neck. Rex raised a hand in greeting, and Dwayne nodded back. They'd spoken several times since Dwayne's transition to stateside duty, conversations that danced around the edges of what had really happened to Carolyn and Vincent. Rex was one of the few people who understood the mathematics of military justice, the sometimes necessary gap between legal proceedings and actual justice. "Good fish, good price," Rex said as he approached, ruffling Tommy's hair with easy familiarity. "How's my favorite Navy brat doing?" "Uncle Rex, Dad's buying a whole fish. Want to come to dinner?" "Can't tonight, kiddo. But soon, okay?" Rex pulled Dwayne aside while Tommy examined their purchase. "How are you holding up? Good days and bad days." "More good lately. The boy's resilient. Kids bounce back faster than adults." "I know. I just want to make sure he has everything he needs to become a good man." Rex studied his friend's face, noting the permanent changes that loss and betrayal had carved there. "You did what you had to do, brother. No one questions that. I question it sometimes. Whether there could have been another way." "Could there? Really? With everything that was at stake?" Dwayne considered the question seriously. Could he have divorced Carolyn, fought for custody, trusted the legal system to protect his son from a woman who demonstrated such poor judgment? Could he have allowed Vincent Swartz to remain free, knowing the man's connections to people who wanted American soldiers dead? "No," he said finally. "There wasn't another way." Rex clasped his shoulder. "Then stop second-guessing yourself. You protected your family and your country. That's what we do." As Rex walked away, Dwayne watched Tommy carefully wrapping their fish purchase in ice, his young face serious with responsibility. The boy was growing up strong, smart, uncorrupted by the poison that had nearly destroyed their family. He would never know the full truth about his mother's death or his father's methods of justice, but he would grow up secure in the knowledge that he was loved and protected absolutely. "Ready to go home, Dad?" "Ready when you are, buddy." They walked toward the parking lot together, father and son, survivors of a war that had been fought in living rooms and bedrooms rather than foreign battlefields. Dwayne had lost his wife, his faith in human nature, and his ability to trust completely. But he'd saved his son, eliminated threats to national security, and learned that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought closest to home. As they drove through the Virginia Beach streets toward their house, cleaned, repaired, and exorcised of all traces of betrayal, Dwayne realized he'd found a kind of peace. Not happiness exactly, but something more durable, the satisfaction of a mission completed, a duty fulfilled, a family protected. Tommy chattered excitedly about their dinner plans, his laughter filling the car with life and hope. In the rearview mirror, Dwayne could see the cemetery where his wife lay buried under a headstone that celebrated a woman who'd never really existed. But ahead of him was his son, healthy, happy, and completely unaware that his father had killed 2 people to ensure his future remained bright. That was a secret Dwayne would carry to his own grave, along with the satisfaction of knowing that some betrayals carried consequences that couldn't be survived, and some protections required methods that couldn't be questioned. Justice had been served. The family was safe. And Chief Petty Officer Dwayne Duffy had learned that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with rifles and explosives, but with patience, planning, and the absolute certainty that protecting the innocent justified any method necessary. The war was over, and he had won.